Good evening, everyone. We're glad that you're with us. Welcome this evening. It is 6 o'clock, and we always try to begin our events on time. We know what a busy, busy time of year this is, so we're grateful that you took the time out of your schedules to be here this evening. I'm Jeff Arnett. I'm the superintendent of schools, and you're going to meet a number of people tonight who are a part of this conversation. But just to kind of give you an overview of what we envision the town hall meeting this evening to be. If you have been with us before, this is our 5th town hall that we've done this year. We actually began the school year in September with a town hall on safety and security, and I'll revisit that in just a moment. But for every town hall, depending upon the topic, the audience is different. The framework or the structure of the meeting is always a little bit different. So tonight is going to be different as well. Last Tuesday evening, we presented a pretty extensive presentation to our Board of Trustees. And by the way, a number of our trustees are with us this evening. If I can find them, let's see, Ellen Baltazar is here. James Spradley is here. Heather Sheffield is here. John Havenstride is the president of our Board of Trustees. Did I miss anybody else yet? All right, they may still be joining us tonight. But we presented a fairly extensive presentation last Tuesday evening to our trustees to give them a look at what it would require for us to consider additional law enforcement on our campuses. We'll talk about why in just a moment. Tonight is going to be a very abridged version of that presentation. We're only going to show some excerpts from that. If you'd like to see the full presentation, it's available online and you can see the full detail that we presented. Laura Clark has joined us as well. She just walked in. So Laura, thank you for being here, one of our trustees. So we're going to be very succinct tonight in revisiting that presentation and sharing with you some excerpts from it. But then more importantly, we want to be able to get to you and give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have so that we can have that dialogue. Because as we've often said, the reason and the value of these town hall meetings is in a Board of Trustees meeting, there's really not the opportunity to engage with the audience, to have a discussion, for you to ask questions and for us to try to respond. Tonight, we're going to provide that opportunity for you, but we do have just a little bit of context that we're going to present up front, and then we'll try to get to that interaction as quickly as we possibly can. I do want to turn the mic over now to John Havenstride, who is the president of our Board of Trustees. He wants to speak on behalf of the board and to give you a little bit further context about why we're having this conversation in this town hall this meeting. John?
Thank you. Thank you for coming this evening. And to anybody that's online, thank you for sitting in. This is among the more difficult and serious topics that that I've encountered as a trustee, and I've been on the board for about 6 years now. I want you to understand that we, the board, and we, the administration, recognize that we should have brought this conversation to you earlier. So we're a little slow in that regard. Nevertheless, we are deeply committed to seeing this through. In last Tuesday's meeting, a consensus of the board maybe embrace isn't the word I want to use, gave the administration permission to begin planning more formally for an Ames ISD police department. What we didn't do in that meeting is we didn't vote, and we didn't define the parameters around which we expected the police department to be formed. And those are that implementation step is extremely important. That's where a lot of the concerns that members of the community will be addressed. The police department itself is just a thing. What you put into it and what you ask of it is really what defines its relationship with the community. And we're going to work very hard to get that right, so that the police department and their actions and activities and responsibilities reflect community values. As Jeff noted, this presentation is short. This is a community dialogue. I think the presentation will run 15 or 20 minutes perhaps, but we've got 2 hours here with you this evening. And I would encourage anybody that has any questions to take this opportunity to ask those questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy. Thank you all again for coming this evening.
John, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about why now and why we're having this conversation. And for those of you who watched the board meeting last week, we'll revisit the rationale for the discussion right now. So if you go back to last September, here at Cedar Creek Elementary, we had a swatting incident. A swatting incident is where somebody calls in a false alarm, a report of an armed intruder, and that required a fairly significant law enforcement response. And of course, parents were very concerned. And it just so happened that only a few days after that, we had a pre-scheduled town hall meeting on safety and security. That's where we wanted to begin the year. So if you go back to last fall and you consider what was going on, soon after that, the Board of Trustees asked the administration to begin studying the possibility of greater law enforcement presence on our campuses. So this is something that we have been working on for the greater part of the school year. Obviously, in the wake of Uvalde and that tragedy, the awareness of the importance of school security was heightened. And so a lot of things were occurring from a year ago at this time into the early fall of this current school year that prompted the board and the administration to look more closely at our security measures. So that's really when we began studying this. At the same time, as we've all now been moving into and to the latter stages of the current legislative session, there's been a lot of discussion, a very pronounced rhetoric at the state level by the governor and by the legislature about the importance of school safety and security. So that's created a whole other context for the discussions that not only our district, but many others are having as well. Going into the early spring, we really accelerated our efforts to look at this and to determine what would be the costs of additional law enforcement presence on our campuses, because the board had asked us to do so. And this is the first time that the school district has really looked at some of the possibilities that you're going to hear about this evening. So that required a lot of study. We had to do a significant cost analysis to determine what, if any, information we were going to bring to the board. And it wasn't just a proposal or a discussion around the possibility of additional law enforcement. It was about all of the measures that we're taking, the physical security of our campuses, everything that we're doing on the mental health side, to the possibility of additional law enforcement presence as well. And then within the last 6 weeks, we're all aware of other tragedies that have been covered in the news, very high profile events, from the school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee. I think that same week there was another significant shooting that occurred in Louisville, Kentucky. And then of course the mall shooting that occurred in Allen, Texas just a few days ago. So these tragedies unfortunately continue to unfold. And that has provided further impetus for us to study some of the possibilities that you're going to hear about tonight. Probably the real impetus in all of this is the relationship that we have with the Travis County Sheriff's Office, which we value. They are really good partners to our school district. We have appreciated their response and their involvement, particularly at Westlake High School. But that relationship is constrained by a number of factors that Travis County Sheriff's is considering that may ultimately impact whether or not we can continue that relationship with them and the presence of school resource officers at Westlake High School. With that, I'm now going to give it to Jeremy Trimble. He is our Assistant Superintendent for Operations and Planning. And Jeremy can talk a little bit more about that relationship. Jeremy?
Thank you, Dr. Arnett. So good evening, everyone. So what I want to do is frame this conversation around what our current scenario is when it comes to law enforcement that are currently in our buildings. First, we have 2 Travis County school resource officers provided by the county at Westlake High School. Those are only 2 police officers that we have in the school district assigned to our campuses. Then at Westlake High School as well, we have 4 Eanes ISD employees that are security attendants that do a lot of security and safety measures throughout the day that, again, are our employees. And then we, of course, have Matt Greer and Brent Kelly, our 2 safety directors, who are each at one of our middle schools, but they can deploy to any campus at any given time. And then lastly, our partnership with our area agencies. We deal primarily with 3 jurisdictions. We have Austin Police Department, Travis County, and then Westlake Hills Police Department. Rollingwood is very close here. They don't have jurisdiction over any of our campuses. We work closely with them, though. They do respond, and they actually work with us on a lot of our drills. So I think it's really good for us to know what our current situation is before we even started this conversation about increasing law enforcement in the district. But with that, there are some limitations here. Travis County, again, providing those school resource officers at Westlake High School, those individuals, that personnel and all of their equipment costs, even their cars, everything, Eanes ISD is responsible for paying 100% of that. It's a rare scenario. This doesn't happen throughout the rest of the state. Travis County is very unique to this. They do not have a cost share program. Most municipalities with school districts have a cost share. We unfortunately don't. And we pay all of those costs that are associated with those school resource officers. That coverage is primarily limited to Westlake High School. There could be some scenarios where we may need their assistance at one of our other campuses, but with anything law enforcement, there's a chain of command in which we want to make sure that we maintain that chain of command in order to have them leave that campus to visit one of our other schools. And then we have had conversations with the sheriff in Travis County about expanding maybe the school resource officer program in the district. And they struggle just to find deputies across their entire organization. So they're not really willing at this point to expand that program. I'll tell you right now that Westlake High School and Vandergrift High School and Leander ISD are the only schools that provide, that Travis County provides school resource officers for. So it's a very small program. And right now they're not willing to expand that. And then our contract, we have a contract with Travis County to provide those officers, but Eanes ISD or Travis County can end that contract with 60 days notice. So there's a lot of risk involved with that contract with a small program. Is this program going to continue in the future? We don't know. So those are some of the risks that we have with the current scenario that we have with the school district. Dr. Arnett?
So if you look at school districts across the state of Texas, and there are more than 1,000 public school districts in our state, they all have varying approaches to school safety and security. These are just some of the possibilities or a combination of these. Many of them have programs to support the mental health of their students and their staff. We're going to talk about mental health tonight a little bit because we don't want you to think that that's not a part of the equation. It certainly is. There are other programs like school marshals and school guardians. Perhaps you've heard about that. Typically, that is where you're arming a teacher or a civilian. And there are a lot of debates about that. That's not something that we are considering at this time. Nonetheless, there are a lot of school districts across Texas that have a version of that program. It's often rural school districts where the response time would be considerable for law enforcement to reach any of those campuses. That's when they might consider a program such as that. There are many school districts. In fact, I think about 1/3 of the school districts in the state of Texas have their own in-house police department, or they have some other type of an arrangement with a local agency, somewhat similar to what we have perhaps with the school resource officers at Westlake High School. Or they have those partnerships with other agencies. And there are a lot of different approaches to law enforcement in Texas, as you know, everything from the Department of Public Safety to the county sheriffs to the local police departments or constables. So there's a lot of different ways that school districts might approach some type of security coverage on their campuses. And then there are some school districts that have a combination of all of these different elements. They'll cobble together coverage depending upon the different jurisdictions in their school districts, and they have some sort of a combined resourceful approach. So these are just some of the different approaches that you see. I did want to talk a little bit about mental health because we do a lot of things proactively to try to address the mental health component of school safety and security in our schools. We just next year, we are already in the budget planning to add 3 additional school-based therapists. That will give us essentially 1 dedicated school-based therapist on every campus. And there's a whole team of individuals who are professional mental health experts in our schools, whether they be counselors or social workers or school psychologists, school-based therapists. All of those individuals will work together to try to create a fabric of support for the mental health, not just of our students, but also of our staffs. And sometimes they get involved with parents as well. So mental health is certainly an important part of this equation, and we have looked at best practices. We've looked at examples where if there is an in-house police department, where those officers will work side by side with the mental health professionals on the campus to try to provide that tandem or that combined approach. The current ratio of students to our mental health professionals in the school district in Eanes is one mental health professional for every 184 students. All right. If you saw the presentation the other evening, you know that there are a lot of different types of mental health professionals that are included in that ratio, but that ratio is significantly smaller even than the ratio that we would be looking at if we were to add law enforcement to our campuses as well. So we believe that mental health is critical in this whole conversation. While we work very hard to control and to support the mental health of our students and our staff within the school environment, ultimately, we don't have control over the mental health of individuals who are in the community. And that obviously is a part of this conversation and this consideration as well, because while we create that close-knit, supportive and protective environment from within the school, we don't control the mental health and some of those concerns that may be exhibited by individuals who are outside the school. And in all the tragedies that we've observed and we've seen and heard about in the news, many times it's individuals from outside the school that are affecting the safety and security of the campus itself. So, Jeremy?
Now that we've framed the conversation a little bit, what I want to do is cover what's next, that process, because there's a lot of steps that we need to take as a district, as a board, and it all starts here and just understanding our community, having a conversation with you to understand what it takes to have a police department, but maybe some of your wonderings, maybe even your concerns. We want to have that conversation. We're going to start that tonight. But then budget implications. We presented a lot of budget implications. What would it cost the district in order to implement this plan for a police department? And then what's reasonable for us to do? Understanding our budget implications, but also hiring and filling all of these positions with the right people. Adopt new board policy. There's a lot of policies involved here. There's a lot of MOUs that we would have to have with the local agencies. There's just a lot of things that we need to do. So we'll begin that conversation next Tuesday with the board and trying to understand what policies are required and what's going to be included in some of those policies, and that'll be the work of the board. And then apply to TCOL. TCOL is the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. That's a state agency which basically commissions police departments, commissions police officers. So there's an application process there. Typically, it's around 3 months turnaround time before we would know if we were approved through TCOL once the application is made following board policy. And then recruit highly qualified officers. One thing to understand is that if this moves forward, the positions, the individuals that are hired are not just going to be police officers. What we want are individuals that are going to be part of this district, part of our campuses, but also part of our community. We want those individuals that are going to be approachable, right? Effective communicators and child-centered mindsets, but also willing to connect with our community and engage with them. So this is going to look a little different in Eanes ISD because we want to make sure that we find the right people. So that may take time before we find those right people, but we're committed to that. It's something that's very important, has been important from the beginning of this conversation. And then commission officers, that's kind of that last step. Once we get TCOL certified, finding those officers, we're going to require officers to be licensed peace officers within the state of Texas. That goes through, again, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. Okay. And then other duties as assigned. One thing to understand is these police officers have a lot of things that they will do on our campuses. We actually got to visit a school district that had them at their elementary campus. And like, what did you do on an elementary campus? But it's incredible once you get those individuals that are in the lunchroom, they're at recess, once you walk through the door. So understanding how integral those individuals could be in the culture of each campus. But we always have respond to critical incidents because they're going to be at the campus. Support mental health initiatives and connect with those resources, working alongside of our counselors on each campus. Traffic is a thing in this school district, and these individuals could help with traffic in and around our campuses, serving as crossing guards when we need them. I do know a couple of our campuses would be glad to see an officer maybe at the crosswalk instead of our dads and our parents trying to do that. And then just monitoring campus activities throughout the day, being on our campuses, walking the hallways and interacting with the kiddos. Conduct our safety audits. Currently, we're required to do our door audits every single week, but we want to do them as much as possible. Having an individual assigned to a campus actually allows those audits to happen more frequently. And then train and assist staff. This could be anything. We even talk about bike safety. But understanding that when you connect with your peers on your campuses, you can have training at every opportunity, staff meetings. It doesn't matter. Every time that there's an opportunity, we can take advantage of that for training. I know this is quick, but what we want to do is give you a quick rundown of the presentation that we provided to the board, but then allow for time for questions and further discussion.
This is only about a third of the presentation that we shared with the Board of Trustees last week. So if you'd like to see that, it's all available online, a lot of information, but there may be questions that you have that we covered in that presentation. And that's why we wanted to devote opportunity for you to ask those questions tonight. This is not scripted. We did not take questions ahead of time. We wanted to give you the opportunity to think spontaneously about something that you're curious or concerned about, so that we can engage with you now and have that discussion. So with that, I'm going to stop. And Claudia McWhorter, who's our Chief Communications Officer, she has a microphone. I've got a microphone. Jeremy's got a microphone. We'll try to get to you so that you can ask your question, and any one of us may pop up. So,
thank you very much, Dr. Arnett. First of all, thanks for all the effort that you put into this, you and the trustees, etc. My first question is, this sounds fantastic. How soon can this be done? The sooner the better. And by the way, I'm not just speaking for myself, I'm speaking on behalf of the 1,116 signatures that we collected to support SROs at every school. So thank you very much.
sure. There is one more slide that I'll jump to here that shows you a possible timeline. And we discussed this with the trustees last week. You can see we're here tonight in a town hall meeting. The board is going to discuss this again on May the 23rd. They're actually going to look at a very preliminary draft of a possible policy if they want to move forward. So the board will review that policy on May the 23rd. They'll probably need to make some decision either at the June 6th or the June 20 meeting, whether or not we're going to formalize this and move forward. And the reason why that's important is because if we were going to do anything with trying to recruit law enforcement to join an eventual police force, all the equipment, all of the other policies and legal requirements, the applications that, as Jeremy said, need to be made to TCOL, all of that work has to happen over the summer so that we could possibly, and we can't make that promise yet, but that's something that we would look at, is possibly have a transitional plan in place where we would have some coverage available on campuses when students return to school in August. But in all likelihood, we would not be able to formalize or commission our own police force if the board decides that they want to do that until probably early in January or the early part of 2024. But our goal, if the board decides that we need to move in that direction, is to have some sort of a transitional plan and coverage in place for the beginning of the school year.
But besides the risks of just all of that work at that timeline, that clearly is a bunch to get done, as it relates to the board's next meeting, what, if any, risks are there to this not being approved?
Risks to it not being approved. Well, I think just the complexities of the policy itself and the 7 trustees needing to agree on that and formalizing the policy, because that would be the first step alongside discussions about what is affordable in our budget for next year. There is a considerable expense to this. We're not going to take the time tonight to go into the detail of the financials. Again, that's available in the online presentation, but those two things happen side by side and simultaneously. Our budget for next year has to be approved by June the 20th. And so the policy, if the board wants to consider that, would need to be approved roughly in the same time frame, so that we have both the financial support as well as the policy framework in place to move forward for next year.
Hi, I'd like to ask if you could elaborate on your plan and your experience in hiring a police force, vetting candidates for the police force, and running a police force.
Sure.
Typically, schools and police forces are not the same kind of organizations to run.
Well, and it's becoming more commonplace. As I said, roughly a third of the school districts in the state of Texas have some version of their own police force where they've actually employed their own officers. The good news is, Eanes being a prominent school district in the state, we have a number of connections, a lot of school districts that we network with regularly, and we talk with them often and frequently about their best practices and what they have learned. And we've learned from them. And we also have the experience of two individuals who are retired police officers who are on our staff. They have many colleagues and they have those connections as well. So there are a lot of things in place that we can learn from and those connections that we can benefit from.
So let me recap then. We don't have experience.
We do not.
There's no one on staff. There's no one who's run a police force who's vetted. And as you mentioned earlier, Travis County's having trouble getting vetted, capable police officers. And if we're looking for those special someones to be friends to our students, in addition to protect them as that first line of defense, what makes us think that we're going to get those folks, and especially in a timeline that you've articulated? It's one thing to have a plan and it's a long-term plan, and you take the proper care and consideration and vetting to get there. It's another to rush that plan to get to a school year start because you're concerned about a contract with Travis County.
Sure. That's a valid point, but you have to start at some point, and you can't begin to make that progress towards what your ideal might be until you actually formalize it and take the first step. So, we have another question, perhaps? Perhaps later in the meeting, we'll come back to you, but we wanted to give other people the opportunity to ask their questions as well. So thank you very much.
I don't really have anything to pontificate. I just want to ask a few questions. I got it written down, and
Okay.
I think I'll hopefully lead us better education to what we're going on here. I just first want to start off, what's the current security posture at just the elementary schools?
So we do not have someone stationed at each of the campuses. We have a number of different physical measures that have been put in place on our campuses, fortunately, that have been provided by our community through bond issues, just like the one that passed a week ago. So there's always a security line item in our bonds that allow us to make sure that we're addressing the physical security of our campuses, but we don't have personnel that are devoted to each of our elementaries.
Okay. The deputy issue, is that like an Austin and Travis County situation, or is that a Texas-wide situation?
Commissioning the officers?
Or just availability of officers?
Oh, I don't know that I can speak to that. We understand that some law enforcement are challenged to find those officers, but again, that's why we feel like we have to begin the process of looking for those officers.
Okay, so I've been notified I gotta give one more. All right. When is the first board vote to indicate which direction we're going to go? And really the precursor to that is, if not this, what else is being advocated?
Mhm. So the first time that the board would potentially take action on this would either be at the June 6th, I think, which has been reclassified as a special meeting, which would allow the board, if it wanted to take action at that meeting, or they have a regular meeting on June the 20th as well. But there's no action item devoted to this topic on the May 23rd agenda next week.
Hello, thanks for all the presentation, all the work you guys have done so far.
Mhm.
You had a slide on there about other options, other things that other school districts do. I think the Marshals, the Guardians, a couple others. And I was wondering if you could talk through why this was the best option, or the one advocated for, and the other ones are less good or maybe not as good, or kind of just some of the pluses and minuses.
Sure. And Jeremy, jump in here at any point. I'll start by saying that when you look at all of those other approaches, they're typically focused on arming civilians. And so that's not a route that we want to take. We certainly do not want our teachers carrying weapons in the classroom. So I think when you distill that down to the options that we feel would be potentially the best fit for Eanes ISD and having control over the officers, being able to deploy them or to require them to respond in a certain way or to possess certain qualifications. The possibility of a police force gives us the most control over what that might look like on each of our campuses.
Hello, Dr. Arnett.
Mr. Lamy?
I can answer your question. I actually met with the city manager of Austin, and he was basically highlighting how the police, Austin APD he is extremely concerned about APD just because of the way in which they've treated their officers over the last few years. So APD, from a standpoint of getting APD to respond and having enough officers in APD, it is extremely low right now. Next, though, Travis County is actually getting a lot more officers. My son does ride-alongs with the Travis County, one of the Travis County sheriffs. And so what he found was that, and what one of the sheriffs was saying that was in Westlake, they've gotten a lot more calls recently just because, and I can say this, I had my car stolen out of my driveway. Now, some of that is user flaw from keeping my keys in the car. So that's a problem. But other than that, notwithstanding that, there are houses that are getting broken into. It doesn't matter whether you are in a poor or rich. We've got a lot of people coming out of the Georgetown area and some gangs that are coming in that are actually that are doing that. And these officers are, the sheriff's department, Travis County Sheriff's is responding to a lot of that. So to answer two of your questions, I'd say we're probably going to get more response from the Travis County than we would ever from APD. So, but it's a problem.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, I can second that. You're going to get a lot more out of Travis County. I'm Stacy Seuss. I'm Travis County Constable Precinct 3. I saw the PowerPoint last week. We're a lean, mean operation, short chain of command, and work well with all community groups. We're interested in bidding on this, and whatever the board decides is most economical and things that will keep students safe is what we want to do. To answer the recruiting problem, I just hired two retired APD officers last week. We're also hiring retired officers from Travis County Sheriff's Office. They don't want to work forced overtime. They don't want to work at night. They're not wild, being semi-retired of working on the weekends. So I think we can get the people that you want that are guardians rather than enforcers, and with an emphasis on mental health with very experienced officers.
Hi, sorry. I am curious. I have read a lot of research around the detriment that school officers do to a campus, both culturally, kids with disabilities, kids of color, other such things. And so my question is around the training. It really sounds like you all are going this direction. So my question is around what type of professional development, what type of training are we going to be doing before January 2024 to ensure that they are upholding our values and are actually truly resulting in supporting our kids with mental health or whatever it might be versus becoming punishment factories, essentially.
It's a great question. And in the emails that we have received, both for and opposed to this possibility, we've seen a lot of references to the research. And it's true, there is research that indicates there are challenges associated with programs like this, or maybe disadvantages. There's also research that speaks to the advantages and the benefits of having law enforcement on campuses. And what we have seen in the research that would support it, it typically speaks to the necessity of having officers who are integrated into the culture of the campus. They're viewed in the same light as our teachers and other respected staff, and they approach their roles and responsibilities differently than a conventional law enforcement officer. They have experience in mental health. They have received extensive training. They look different than your traditional police officer. So all of those would be approaches that we would take. And while we're not yet to that point, but we've had conversations with our board about what would this look like in Eanes ISD, because we're different than every other school district. Much of the research and the statistics that you cite come from school districts that have a very different demographic, different socioeconomics. Sometimes they're in urban areas. We don't look like that. And so we want to approach this in a very constructive manner. And we want to make sure that we're investing in these individuals with the kind of training that allows them not just to be qualified law enforcement on our campuses, but also integrated into the culture and particularly the approach to mental health that we take too. So it would look differently. And you're right, this is ambitious. And I don't think that we see this training occurring by next January. I think we see this training occurring even before that as we bring individuals onto our campuses, perhaps in a transitional approach, because we want to make sure that in whatever capacity they're there in, from the very first day, they are prepared to be a part of the Eanes way of doing things. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. I've got two questions. The first question is, does the board feel that its number one priority is to protect the lives of children? That's my first question. I know you do a lot of great work. I respect the work you do. Your work is complicated. But I just want to know, with all the choices that you have to make, is that the number one priority that you feel you have? The second question I have is, what discretion the board has on how the Proposition A safety and security money is going to be spent. I did a quick brush up. It looks like I think about $1.8 million for safety and security. I was at the meeting a week ago and there seemed to be a lot of hand wringing about how the money was going to be raised. But in my simplistic mind, it didn't seem that hard. It was like, you got 1.8 million for that. It seemed like the number that was being floated to hire the SROs was going to be about 1,500,000 roughly for the first year. That, just to make a point, is about 63 cents per child per day while they're at school. So my second question is, if it is the board's number one priority to protect children and teachers, is 63 cents a day per child worth it?
Sure. So the two questions, let's start with the second one. And Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to take that one to talk about the latitude that we have within an approved bond issue. And then John, if you'd like to speak on behalf of the board about its commitment, I'll bring my microphone to you.
Okay, so I'll start with the first question, and included in Prop A, the $1.8 million. Tell you that bond dollars can't necessarily be spent on people, can't be on teachers, et cetera. So one thing that we've identified in that budget, if you go back and look at the presentation, there's a lot of startup costs. We need equipment, we need cars, we need a whole lot of things. So there can be latitude with bond funds in order to purchase equipment. And so that's something that we've laid out to the board that may be an opportunity to fund some of those things. Understanding that when it comes to the officers themselves, those individuals, that they would have to be funded out of our general operating fund. But we tried to break it down and identify some of those costs that they would have latitude to purchase some of those startup costs and the physical things that are tied to the development of a police department. Joe.
Thank you. In answer to your question, there's nothing more important to the Board of Trustees than the safety and security of our kids. If our kids aren't safe, if they don't feel safe, they will not learn. So it all begins with secure campuses.
Thank you both. I have a question about just knowing that you all know very well that you have a very vocal, involved, and engaged parent community. Do you have any the idea of a one-time town hall is kind of a challenging way to get feedback. Do you have any intent to poll the parent community and find out how many are pro, for, or undecided or against this measure?
We have discussed that possibility. At this time, we don't plan to do any kind of quantitative data gathering on this. That's why we're appreciative of the fact that many people have turned out this evening. I can tell you as well that a lot of individuals have been emailing and contacting the trustees. So they're gathering that input from a variety of standpoints. And I think they'll take all of that into consideration. Well, at this point, given the late time in the school year and the fact that the board has to make this decision rather quickly, we just don't feel like a survey is the best way for us to gather that information. It's been discussed, but there aren't plans at this moment to conduct a survey.
Hello, I have a question. It's a two-part question. I used to do the crisis intervention training for the Austin Police Department. And the part that I presented on was about mental health and interacting with people with disabilities. I know how the Austin Police Department gets trained. I know that it's up to date. I know the language is correct. Today, I went through the curriculum for TCOL and it's really out of date. The language is really not where it should be. And I'm wondering, are we going to have our own experts here in Eanes go through that training, because it hadn't been updated since 2015, the part that I went through today on mental health, because I think it really needs it. And I would prefer to have them be up to date on working with this special population. And the other thing I wanted to say is I've got a lot of experience with ISD police departments, school-based police departments. And it's important for all of us to know if that's the route we're going to go. It is very different from having a municipal police department or the sheriff's working with us. There's a whole nother set of rules that probably won't be popular with a lot of us. So it's just something to consider if we're going to go that route.
Okay. Thanks, Maggie.
Hi, I know that you'd mentioned research earlier, and so I'd like to know what discussion you guys have had and what research you've looked at regarding effectiveness of armed guards on campus, given the Journal of American Medical Association study found that the death rate is actually 3 times higher at schools with armed guards, and that armed guards are often an attraction for these people who often have suicidal intent.
And if I'm not mistaken, if you refer to that research and the numbers that you're citing, those are almost exclusive to high schools. So again, we're talking about coverage at our elementaries and our middle schools too. So we understand that high schools are very different environments, which is why we have dedicated school resource officers on our high school campuses. But there's very little research now pertaining to elementary and middle schools because that's a very different environment. And so that's what we're focused on. We actually have looked at a number of studies that speak to the benefits and the advantages of having law enforcement presence on all of your campuses. But this is now something that I think schools across the country are beginning to consider, and that's the importance of having armed security on elementary campuses as well. So that realm of the research is just beginning to emerge. Yes, and we have actually looked at a bibliography of research with our trustees. We provided it to them, as well as the research that many of you are citing in your emails too. So, yes.
Can you tell me what Highland Park ISD does for security, please?
Sure. Jeremy?
I will share that. Mr. Matt Greer and myself took a visit to Highland Park, again, very similar demographics. So Highland Park actually now has an officer at each one of their campuses, including elementaries. And that's when I referenced what does an SRO in elementary look like? We had the pleasure of meeting an officer at Bradfield Elementary. And that's where we learned kind of what his day-to-day activity would be. Now, with that said, their funding completely different. Because they're across a couple of jurisdictions within the town of Highland Park and in University Park. police department. One of them gives them money for officers, the other one gives them officers. So they're not really accountable for paying for many, except the chief and one other officer. But when you look at the structure and the model of having officers on campuses, that's an example of what we explored and kind of what we discussed with the board last Tuesday night. Absolutely.
How long do you think it would take for us to get
One on every campus. Our goal would be to have a commissioned police department by January of 2024. But like we mentioned before, we want the right people, and that can take time. And so that's why we look at what are some possible transition opportunities as we approach this next school year. And it's going to come really quickly once the summer comes. So transition period, but as soon as we can within that process, that we apply for TCOL and get that feedback, we're able to have equipment. We want to make sure we have equipment for those officers that we do hire. So that's a goal. And we'll do the best we can if given direction to meet that goal. And we'll communicate along the way.
I think whatever scenario our Board of Trustees would approve, our utmost commitment will be to make sure that we're finding the very best, most capable and qualified officers to fill those roles. And that may take time. Yes.
Scenarios. What are the scenarios that does not happen by January 1st of 2024? So funding, but also like if it's not a scenario that we're pursuing, at least that our elementary schools are most positions on. What are the other scenarios that we're going to approach by January 1st, 2024? But not police and what else?
Sure. And I'll be really quick, and then I know our guest behind you has the microphone. So once the board approves policy and once the board approves the budget, then we will move as expediently as the governance systems and processes will allow us to move. And realizing that we're subject to the application process by the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. So we don't control that, they do, but we're already beginning to think about what that would look like for us, but that does take time. All of the equipment, the vehicles that are required and necessary for a police department, all the other legal considerations that go with that. But the benchmarks, the most important milestones would be approval of the policy and approval of the budget. And if that were to occur before we leave for the summer or before the summer really begins, then we're going to move as quickly as we can. Yes.
Thank you. This hits really close to home for our family. Literally, we live next to the school. So in the fall, when we got swatted, the barricades were at our door, and I see some parents who were on our lawn that day. And about a month later, my daughter's preschool had a similar incident where she was locked in a bathroom for over an hour before the police could get there. So this feels very personal. I think having the security officers, I know you guys will go about that well. I was especially glad to see that additional mental health support is a big part of the plan. But, hiring people is one thing. And I think about, school safety is community safety. And I'm curious, today is probably not the time, but I'm looking forward to hearing about the initiatives and practices and best practices that are being put in place. Not just to, work with individual kids who need help, but to make sure that there are programs to find kids who need that support. And also how we're going to look at the training. School specific training for the best way to help in terms of an incident, right? I think are we looking at best practices school by school in terms of architecture by architecture at different schools, and what's the best way to get the kids out of the building or in the building, or what makes the most sense, that we're looking at all of that?
Sure. So let me take the second part of that question. And then Molly, I might ask you to join us for a conversation just briefly about risk and threat assessment, because I think that's really one of the other things you're asking about. Just in terms of the layout of our campuses and understanding what's the best way to protect students and staff, egress, ingress points, should there be a critical incident. That's why we're so fortunate to have Brent Kelly and Matt Greer on our staff, both of whom are highly experienced former law enforcement agents. And they work with each of our campuses every day to make sure that staff and students know what they would do whether it's through drills or just helping our staff be familiar with the layout of the campuses, what they would do in response to any kind of an incident. So I can tell you that we're being proactive in that regard. And that's why the audits and the drills are so important in our overall security strategy. In terms of assessing individuals who I think we might want to make sure that we're supporting and intervening, perhaps preempting any kind of behaviors where they might harm themselves or someone else. There's a lot that we do in that domain as well. Molly, do you want to speak to that? Molly May is our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, and all of the mental health and counseling components rest under her area of responsibility.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. So in terms of mental health, as Dr. Arnett said, we definitely have a lot of support in our campuses, and we look to those people as the kind of our first line of defense for our students, being really proactive, preventative. And so that's our focus. We, look at the police officers that we would hire if that was what the board decided to do as definitely partnering with us. But in terms of, getting in there and counseling our students, making sure we're meeting their everyday needs, that is the mental health people on our campus. So that's our counselors, our school-based therapists, our licensed specialists in school psychology. But we can definitely see a way to partner with any police officers. And, we have a lot of times where we have students maybe in crisis. We have students who things are going on in their home life, and having a police officer may be able to go and do a home visit to sit down and talk to those students about what is going on in their home. That's what they do already right now, our SROs at the high school. We work really closely with them too on training. We have a lot of students in special education whose behaviors may be unexpected at times. And, someone who doesn't know those students, who's just walking into a situation, may think it needs to be handled a certain way. We have worked so closely with our SROs at the high school that they really are just an additional support for our school staff that we appreciate. So sometimes we may have a child in crisis who may be acting out, maybe, in a situation that looks violent, and the police officers know that the school staff have that situation under control unless they need support and they need help. The officers never rush in first. They always seek to find out what they need to do based on what the school staff knows about that specific child. So there is a lot of training that we've already done. We have great examples already at the high school of how this works with our students with special needs. I'm the former special education director here in Eanes, and so that is close to my heart and very important to me. That is something that our officers would definitely be trained in. But it is important to focus on that mental health. We do have a lot of students who are struggling. We had students that were struggling, pre-COVID, and COVID has exacerbated some of that. We look at those students. We have a wraparound team in our district for any student who, kind of escalates to a specific concern, that we're looking at how to support them. We're looking at family support. So, we have all of that in place, and a police force is just something that would then go in tandem with we already have in district. But we would provide a lot of training. I know the special education department would be leading a lot of that to make sure that the language is correct and that the techniques they're using are in line with what we are doing in the school district.
Good question. Andrea, you have one right here?
I promise.
You got another one?
I
Okay.
promise this
And we'll come
gentleman-
back to Andrea in just a minute.
Oh, wait, now I lost. The gentleman.
Thank you for that on the mental health side. Could you elaborate on if the escalation path has changed, or if you have a different viewpoint on what to do? I mean, obviously we're talking about covering that hypothetical student with service and coverage, and but if somebody does start to sort of veer off, would something be done differently, or have you learned anything in the past few years that you may not have done, 5 or 10 years ago?
Sure. Molly, do you want to talk about the threat assessment process? If it rises to that level, do you mind if I come to you?
So if we have identified in the school district a student who is either a very specific harm to themselves or others, we're working again as a team. We have our safety directors are involved in that. We have our mental health different staff. I'm involved in that team. So we're looking at ways to support those students. And we're making sure that, you know, we're looking at just kind of in general, what's going on in their life, how it is that we can, help them, how we can make sure that our schools are safe. If there is any specific threat that that student makes to the school, again, or, you know, to classmates or teachers. So we are definitely looking if that's a situation with students, and we have a team that meets and addresses those particular students. I think if there's an event at school where the behavior really escalated into something that, again, was, you know, a very specific threat to someone else, that's when we would have to bring in law enforcement, and you know, we can do that if necessary. You know, we definitely try not to do that. And a lot of times we can de-escalate that, but I'm not speaking of a student coming into the school, you know, with a weapon. I'm talking more of a student who is having a behavior episode, you know, and possibly going after someone or themselves, that maybe we would try to treat that differently. But obviously a weapon is a very different situation.
Of course, thanks. One other question, as it relates to the officers, would the wages be, you know, market based, or would there be any governing factors on what wage, you know, they would be hired at? Because as the gentleman spoke to, like the APD officers that might want to not work on weekends or work in the evenings, Austin obviously is much more expensive now. So I know, you know, just overall cost of living and whatnot would be a concern. So do you have to pay a market wage, or can you potentially pay like top of market wage?
Jeremy, do you want to take that?
Absolutely. So that's going to be just as competitive as every other position that we have, right? And so we're very conscious of that. And when we build budget numbers, we're conscious of that to make sure that we're confident that we could attract the right people at the rate that we want to pay. One thing to understand, it will look different than Austin Police Department, because we're trying to find that individual that wants something different here in Eanes ISD. This is going to attract someone different than a traditional APD officer. And so we're looking at that, but it's just like teachers, right? We talk about our teachers having to drive in from all across the region, pass through all these school districts to come here and educate your children. I am hopeful that we'll see the same passion from officers that would want to do something possibly within their own community. Just because they're at Austin Police Department does not mean that they don't live right down the street here or anywhere else across that district. So I'm very hopeful that our wages that we set will be very competitive in this market for Eanes ISD.
And the projections that were presented to the board are based upon a wage that we believe is competitive, given the current market.
I'm a parent here at Cedar Creek and was on my way to the school to volunteer the day that I watched dozens of police surround the school and lock it down. I feel like we're dancing around the fact that the impetus for doing this now is because of the concern and worry that not if, but when that is real and there is someone at one of our schools. How would implementing this plan have changed the response to that incident? Because at the time, all the parents standing across the street, we didn't know that there wasn't somebody in the school for an hour. So we saw the response of the surrounding police departments that have all the partnerships with Eanes. How would having our own police department have changed how that response time and any other thing that you may have learned from that day?
Well, if we had our own police force at that moment, we would have controlled the response. Now, given that we have a very good partnership with all of the local agencies around us, but we don't control their response time, nor the way they may conduct themselves during any type of episode like that. Not that any of them didn't behave themselves professionally, but nonetheless, if we had our own police force, we could have controlled the response in that moment. We would have had somebody on site who could have helped coordinate that response and have worked alongside our staff and our officers who would have responded in that situation. So it would have been a complete Eames response in cooperation with other law enforcement, as opposed to multiple agencies responding and then having to coordinate among themselves.
This was an issue that happened in Uvalde was, does that mean that the officer on site would be the officer in charge, which I didn't know before a year ago was something that was important. But I mean, so is that what you were envisioning? And is that something that everyone is going to know, that there's not going to be a question about who's in charge, that no one's in charge?
Yeah, we won't take the time in this meeting to get into the technicalities of what occurred in Uvalde, but the easiest answer is that we would have jurisdiction and control over our schools because of our own police officers who would then respond to that situation. And they would be the ones to then coordinate the responding agencies that might be there to support.
Okay.
We had Andrea over here too, Claudia, to your left.
I was just wondering, I know that there was some talk of 6 versus 10 officers, and I wondered how that decision was being made, if it was one or the other, or if it's a goal eventually to have one officer at every campus, and then that's a phase. So I was just wondering if you guys could speak a little bit more to that, and then just the decision-making process. If it was the lower number, how it would be decided where the officers were, if there was a plan related to that too.
So we presented two options, kind of two staffing options to the board last Tuesday. Coming out of that meeting, coming here tonight, the plan would be to staff one officer on every campus. That's kind of the model that that we've established, and planning wise. That can change, that can adjust depending on conversations moving forward with the board. But that's some of the information that's behind here.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so ultimately, so what I want to circle back on that is it has not been voted on. Okay. So it can still change. We presented 7 and an 11. It could be somewhere in between there in the end, but the board will still have to deliberate on that and decide what direction they want to move forward with if they ultimately vote on that. So it's still to be determined. Okay, but there were two scenarios. And if you haven't seen those, it's in the presentation from last Tuesday.
Yes.
Is there a reason why this topic couldn't be first on the list for the May 23rd meeting? It worries me a little bit that it's not going to be discussed until June 6th, and you have to have the budget approved by June. And if you miss out on that 3 months planning on for the summer, that significantly sets us back. And I know that it's an aggressive amount of work, but it already seems too slow as a parent. But I think it's important that it's done right and thoughtfully, and I support all of that. I just think it should be the top item on every board meeting. I can't imagine something more urgent. And I think there are members of the community that if funding becomes the only stumbling block, would like to know and have time to help brainstorm how we can work together on that issue.
Right. And remember, I said there are two parts to this that would need to be decided potentially before the end of June. One is policy. And there's a process that the board has to follow to consider any new or changes to policy. This is on the agenda for the May 23rd meeting to specifically discuss the policy that would be necessary in order to commission our own police force. So it is on the May 23rd agenda, and it is one of the early items as well. Yeah.
This is a follow-up to what Wendy said. Yeah, school safety is public safety, and I love everything that we've talked about and discussed, but I also think that we, as a district, I'd love to see us bring in the community into school safety a bit more. And so it's conversations that I've had with many of you guys before, but just saying it again, I would love for there to be, like, at each school in the fall, a student safety night where you invite parents to come into the conversation, and topics addressed are, here's our 3-pronged system. Here's how we identify students. And here are things for you to look for in your own children. Or this is our protocols that we follow within our schools. Here are certain topics that you might want to have with your conversations you want to have with your kids to further make sure that you're empowering them to make the right decisions with their teachers and things like that. And then my question in that is, how much input is the community going to have in the protocols and I don't even know if it's possible in the hiring process, but that we can ensure that we're bringing on the right people who are a fit for our students, who are a fit for our families, and because they are a part of us as well. Is that something that you guys plan on bringing us into that conversation or not?
I think to the extent we can, we're certainly open to that because we want this to be, we want these individuals to be an important part of the community. To the first part of your question, or maybe your comment, as Jeremy said, there are a lot of things and a lot of opportunities for these individuals to support on the campus. And I think that training or a community safety night would be an ideal role for these officers to play. So I think from a community and public engagement standpoint, we see these individuals as being really integral to our approach.
Hi, thank you to all of the trustees and Dr. Arnett and others who have put a lot of work into this. My first school board meeting was last week, and I'm so glad that you wanted to move with urgency and hold the town hall. I thought every chair in here would be full. I think there must be a lot of parents at home, thinking about these issues and wanting to participate. I hope that you will continue to engage the community. You've done a great job so far. What I'm wondering about is at that meeting, you mentioned the audit. And I understand that there's probably a good amount of information that you can't share publicly about what your challenges are from a safety and security standpoint. I am supportive of the SROs. I'm a mother of a preschooler at Eanes Elementary and a kindergartner at Bridgepoint. I love the schools so far, but I am scared every day, honestly, probably like most of these parents in this room. And I want to know about the other measures in addition to the SROs, like bulletproof glass, and those weekly door checks are just not sufficient. Like, can we have facilities or custodial staff helping with that so that every single school every day is doing that, whatever. There are a lot of things that I can't anticipate. But what can you share about the audit and what you learned and the other steps that you and the board will be considering along with the SRO budgetary, considerations?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to that question, but it's a really good one. I'll talk a little bit about the audit itself. So there's a lot of highly secure confidential information in that audit, which is, you're exactly right. We can't necessarily discuss all of that publicly. The board has only seen an early summary of our most recent audit, and the full audit then has to be presented to the board in a closed session so they can consider all of the implications of that. That will probably happen sometime in the next few weeks. And then we determine from the audit itself what excerpts from that we might be able to share publicly. For example, in the board meeting last week, we did share an excerpt from not only the 2023 audit, but the 2020 audit that pertained to this discussion. So there are some things that we're allowed to discuss publicly. I'm going to let Jeremy talk a little bit more about the holistic approach to school safety. I did want to mention a couple of other things before I allow him to talk. One is we talk about the trainings and the drills that occur. There is extensive involvement from all of our local law enforcement partners currently. All of the agencies around us, they participate in those drills to make sure that everyone around us is prepared and they know how to respond on any one of our campuses because they're all unique, especially Eanes Elementary. The high school certainly because of its size. So that collaboration, those partnerships are essential, if not critical, to all that we do to protect our students. The other distinction that I'll make is that we're very focused on the people approach to school safety. We do a lot in terms of preparing our staff, making sure that they're equipped, they know how to respond. And the contrast to that is the product approach. There are a lot of products out there now that we're hearing about, learning about, that pertain to school safety and security. And obviously those are being pitched to us in hopes of generating income and a profit for those particular companies. So we have to be very discerning about the products that we look at as well as their cost, because many of them are quite expensive. But there's a lot of other things that we're doing, and I'll let you talk about a more holistic approach.
Yes, and this was kind of a big topic, big part of the presentation that we gave, I think back in September, at the beginning of the school year, because there are a lot of requirements coming from Uvalde to start the school year. And we had to sprint to get a lot of things in place. But I'll tell you, we didn't have to sprint as quickly as a lot of other districts because it's been a priority. Safety has always been a priority. The way in which we implement it has changed over time. Even when you call to the button, if you visit any of our campuses, you have to push the button in order to gain access. That was done, I think, about 5 years ago. Something that we wanted to put in place is another layer. So everything is layered. And we want to continue to put extra layers in there if they're appropriate. And so even when it came to the safety and security film that's on glass, we ordered ours before Uvalde even occurred in order to try to get this in place. And so we were able to get a lot of that installed. Couldn't do it all because of supply chain, prop alarms, all that was planned before because we know how important it is. And so we're in a better place, but we'll continue to strive to be even better. Fencing, we have a lot of fencing. We did a lot of fencing in the 2019 bond. Guess what? The state's probably going to come out with some new requirement that we may have to meet. And so what we'll do is we'll pivot. And so we are very thankful that the community has supported bonds because bond dollars can really help us implement any of those measures that are mandated by the state. So again, it's all layers, it's multiple layers, and we want to do as much as we can that is reasonable and practical.
So I think we're talking about implementing a fairly unique part in a school district. And I'm wondering, these are people who are going to be authorized to use force in certain circumstances. What kind of community oversight have you guys discussed for this kind of group? How do you envision implementing it, and what kind of oversight will there be?
Well, ultimately, the oversight rests with the administration and with the Board of Trustees through the policies that it puts in place. So I think that's the conversation that we have to have both during the policy phase as well as the administrative regulations that apply to this should we go forward with the police force, and making sure that there is appropriate oversight and accountability and the expectations are consistent with our values in terms of what we expect as a school district. So I can assure you there is going to be more than adequate oversight of these individuals should we ever have a commissioned police force. We're here.
Y'all talked about 6 people and 11 people, but it's going to be difficult to hire 11 people across the board and have them in the schools ready to go. How are you going to prioritize who goes where?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, our first priority is finding the right people and making sure that they have the qualifications that match what the expectations are of our community and our Board of Trustees. So ultimately, perhaps if we're going to have coverage on every campuses, it would require 11 individuals. So that would be 2 at the high school, that'd be 1 at each of the middle schools and 1 on each of our elementary campuses. Some of what will factor into that will be what we know to be current response times and proximity of available police officers. So we'll look to see where we may have the greatest gap potentially, should there be a critical incident, and making sure that we have somebody deployed there first. Whereas in other areas of our school district, other jurisdictions, we believe that the response time would be less. Not that that's less important, but that may factor into those decisions as well. But we just have to figure out who is available, who can we hire that matches our expectations in the job description, and then begin to place them on campuses. And that may occur over a period of several weeks. It's very possible that it's not going to happen all at once. You're getting your steps in tonight, Claudia.
What is the current, I know that the legislature is looking into requiring police buttons in all room. What is the current state of the district considering police buttons in each room? For instance, if a guard is at the front of the school, a shooter, somebody comes in through the side, a teacher hears, this, how does that teacher alert the police department as fast as possible at this stage right now?
Sure. Jeremy, do you want to talk about that?
So we have two options. One, we have an intercom PA system, so they can obviously utilize that, but we also have phones, emergency phones. We have phones in every classroom, every office. That phone can go a lot of different ways, but that phone dials 911 real fast. And as soon as that 911 is called, it notifies a very large group of individuals who can assist in any way, but it goes straight to dispatch. When dispatch sees a 911 call coming from any school district, any school campus, obviously they're going to deploy resources as quickly as possible. But so there's a couple of different ways that they could do that. There is not a police button in every class, but we do have measures in place that they could contact 911 as quickly as possible.
But you make a good point. There's a lot of new potential requirements that are emerging in the legislative session, none of which have been signed into law yet, but we're monitoring those bills very closely as they progress through the legislature and waiting to see what impact, if any, that would have on some of these decisions that we're making. The legislative session will end later this month, and then that still affords the board a little bit of time to adjust accordingly should we need to make some adjustments in our budget or in our approach to what we're discussing tonight. Other questions? All right. You sure? No other questions. So we're here tonight. We're fair game for any other questions that you might want to ask. Yes, sir.
Just in your opening remarks, you sort of made a distinction between policing sort of external threats from the wider community and preventing threats from inside the school. And it seemed like just looking at the list of potential responsibilities and roles that an officer could play, and we're really, at least at the moment, just talking about like one officer. It did seem that those roles get in each other's way a little bit, like somebody focused on policing external threats can't do that very well if they're wrapped up in the internal day-to-day operations of the school and they have responsibilities all over the place in conjunction with the other teams and crossing guard and all that. So it's just, am I reading that right? Is there a perception that these are two different roles, or is it more holistic and integrated?
I think that's an astute observation. We think that it also speaks ultimately to the ability of a trained law enforcement officer to pivot and to respond should there be a critical incident. So he or she may be a crossing guard at the moment, but should something happen, I think they take on a completely different persona and approach to respond to whatever that situation may be. So, these are individuals who are going to be tasked with not only scanning the environment internally, but also making sure that they're aware of any potential external threats as well. It's a big job. It's an important job, but it's a role that we presently don't have anyone in right now. At least on a campus by campus basis. Again, we're very fortunate that we've got our 2 school resource officers from Travis County, as long as that agreement lasts. And we're very fortunate that we've got Brent Kelly and Matt Greer here as well, who can be deployed to campuses and to move around, but they can't be on 10 campuses at one time. Yes, Sarah? Okay.
Would Brent Kelly and is it Matt Greer? I know they're at the junior highs. Would they still stay at the junior highs to assist and still be deployable? Because I know like the junior high kind of is in this area with another elementary school, or would they move to the administration building, and would they still be deployable at the administration building, or would they serve as just an oversight?
Yeah, some of that's still to be determined, realizing that the requirements of having your own in-house police force does stipulate that you have to have a chief, someone who is an administrator over the department. One of the other benefits of that role, we believe, is that if we have an officer on a campus who's not available on a certain day, perhaps he or she is ill that day, then the chief can act as the substitute almost in that case and be deployed to that campus to fill in. But in terms of where our current staff versus the future staff would be stationed, that's something that we still have to discuss. And it's probably going to be skill-based and where we think the greater needs are.
Dr. Arnett, one more question. If the board, it sounds like everyone here feels like this is a situation that needs to be dealt with some urgency. But the reality is that finding the right officers is going to take time. What's the board's position on an intermediary measure where you have some kind of armed guardians until we get to that point? And is there a program in place to train them so that the community would have an understanding of what their skills are or what their requirements might be?
Yeah, I think that training again is paramount. Even if they're not yet commissioned officers or officers commissioned in our own police force, if they are here with us at any point in the fall, we're going to make sure that they are properly trained and that they've got the right credentials to be in that position until they are commissioned. And oftentimes realizing we're talking about retirees or honorably discharged police officers who are highly experienced as well. So did that answer your question, or was there another part? I'm sorry if I. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sure. And that's a great question, and that's for the board to still deliberate. John, I don't know if you want to answer that on behalf of the trustees.
What I think you're going to hear in the discussion portions of the meetings where we pick up safety and security is a number of the board members digging in on that very topic. How do you manage the transition? It's a very sensitive topic, and it's a very important topic, but it's still TBD. You know, the board hasn't established consensus, but the board has recognized that it's a sensitive area. And and you can just expect a ton of questions on it.
I hope this is an easy question. So we've been talking about school hours, I feel like. Are there any plans right now to have coverage at after-school events or functions? I think Dr. Arnett, you're always going from function to function. Just for instance, like a choir performance where you've got an auditorium full of people. I didn't see any security there when we have that, but to me, that's just as much school as anything else for the students and for the parents.
Sure.
So-
Jeremy, would you talk to the overtime aspect of?
Sure. So there will be opportunities because we do need security. We have security currently at events, but this will allow us to have even more security, more opportunities for them. And to tell you the truth, if they're coming from law enforcement, that's kind of attractive to have some of those opportunities to make a little bit more money in overtime and things like that. That's almost an expectation when you come into a school district, school police department. So there will be those opportunities. But some of the things that we've done for some events are just leverage the force security personnel that we have at the high school that are actually Eanes ISD employees. They know the campuses, things like that we can utilize their skills as well. But that would be an opportunity that would come in the future.
And I think back to the benefits that we touted earlier, this potentially would provide us with control over our own officers. We can tell them where they need to be, when they need to be there, what events are most important. Now, with the current arrangement, we can request that, but we don't ultimately control where they go or when they're available. Andrea?
Sorry, thank you. I just had another follow-up question. I know we talked about the 6 versus 11, and I know the board hasn't decided one way or the other to go with any of this. I guess my question is, if the board approves this plan, would it be to eventually have one officer on every campus, or is one of the scenarios still that we would have shared officers?
If you want me to speak for the trustees, I think the answer that we heard in the meeting was that they're committed to ultimately having somebody on every campus, but I'll let you elaborate.
The scope and scale hasn't been established. We're talking about a variety of options, and so we probably need another couple of meetings to establish consensus. Hope that helps.
Floor still open. Yes.
Could you just elaborate on the qualifications? You talk about finding the right people. It's big what we're talking about a lot tonight, but what exactly are the qualifications in terms of mental health training, de-escalation,
Sure.
other racial and culturally sensitivity type of trainings.
Do you want to take that, Jeremy? Or-
Absolutely. So there's going to be a laundry list of requirements. Some of them are just the basic requirements to be a school resource officers. And then beyond that, some of our priorities, we understand what our board priorities are. That's for every single one of us, including a police officer. When it comes to mental health, we know we all have a part in that. And so we'll include that additional training, special education. Molly already spoke to the amount of progress that we've made just with our school resource officers at the high school. So that'll be part of their training for any officer that would come online or any security personnel. And then we will host our own trainings. We will train our teachers and staff as well. And so we still need to establish every aspect of what that training would be, but it's going to meet the priorities of this district and not any other district. So we'll make sure that we are able to check all those boxes.
I think the one thing you can be assured of is we're going to do our best to exceed the standard. We try very hard in Eanes to be excellent in everything that we do, including the people that we hire. And whatever the standards are for training in the industry that you may see in other school districts, we're going to do everything we can to be above and beyond that.
Just to help answer that question, would you mind, if he doesn't mind, sharing BK's background and what he did at APD? I think that shows the level of individuals that we attract and hopefully retain.
Sure. Matt and BK, why don't you guys come up and you can introduce yourselves and in 30 seconds, just tell everybody a little bit about your background and the connections that you have.
And I will speak to these two gentlemen. We didn't just find these guys on the street. So it took a little while to find these individuals with the level of skill set that was complementary to each other, but also to the school district. So they all have their unique backgrounds that we've learned a lot from them when it comes to K-12 and education and how you can take some of that background and really do great things here. So
I'm Matt Greer. I'm the big one. No, I'm Matt Greer. I was with Austin Police Department for almost 23 years. I retired in 2019 as lieutenant and director of the Austin Regional Intelligence Center. Spent a lot of time talking about school safety while I was there and working with agencies like the FBI and our partners to train locally and to be prepared. And that's actually what brought me to Eanes ISD. So glad to be here and appreciate y'all's support.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brent Kelly, otherwise known as BK for some of you that know me. Everybody calls me that, so if you'd like to address me as BK from here on out, that's fine too. So wanted to stand in front of you guys and just, first of all, thank you all for taking the time to be here on a weekday night. It means, you guys obviously have a passion for safety and want to make sure and ensure that our children are safe. That's our ultimate goal. That's why I came here. My background in the police department, I also was there for 23 years and retired from the Austin Police Department. I am super fortunate to work with the team that we have, a very supportive team, and very grateful that I get to work with this guy right here, who's taught me a lot as I'm coming up on my 1 year here in the district. Very excited about it. I have a passion for kids and kids' safety. In fact, most of my career involved either being part of the crisis intervention team of mental health services and the protection of children, whether that be the physical, sexual, or emotional abuse of children, investigating those crimes and holding those accountable for their actions, including various cases, child exploitation, child abuse, mental health cases involving adults all the way down to young children in need. Am I a mental health professional expert? Not necessarily, but I know the ins and outs, and I'm very well versed and trained from the amazing training that we got from the department with thousands of hours to bring our experience, our knowledge here and incorporate that. Matt has introduced me, which many people don't realize, to what goes on behind the scenes with our awesome staff of our behavioral threat intervention team. We meet every other week, and Matt has taught me a lot, and I've been able to be a part of that to identify our kids that are in mental health crises, those that present a danger to themselves or others. That has been a neat new passion for both of us to work together and work with our amazing staff that we sit down, evaluate, we try to be as proactive as possible and connect those dots, right? So we can intervene and be in front of problems before they become one. So, you know, I want you guys, I know there's people here that are highly supportive of this idea. I know there's people that have reservations, and we understand that. What I can tell you is this. I hope this brings you some peace of mind to know and realize that if this does proceed to move forward with the items that have been discussed, that Matt and I are going to be very meticulous about the people that we reach out to, the qualifications they have, the personalities they have, the ability to communicate, and probably like kids, right? And they got to like kids. So that's probably important too. But just to get along with your kids, the teachers, be a resource, a true resource officer, a guardian, but yet you're a police officer. And these are not rookies coming in, guys. These are people that have many, many years in law enforcement. We're not looking for newbies. We're looking for people that have backgrounds, whether it is CIT, mental health training, the background there, whether it is someone with investigative experience, with someone with tactical experience that can train our group. But we both have a lot of contacts that we reach out to on a daily basis. We live and breathe talking about safety, security every day we're at work for your kids. We visit the campuses. We try to be involved. And I can say personally, from the past, when I used to work as an Austin PD officer, I would go work overtime at many of the elementary schools. In the past, I'd kind of laugh if you told me you needed a cop at every school, including an elementary school. You just didn't see it. And now it's becoming more common. But when I did work there, it was at a church, and I would be in uniform, and I was a rock star every single day with those kids, absolute rock star. And I didn't know how they would take it. And I still walk in now in plain clothes to some of our elementary campuses, and these kids look at me and ask me, "Are you a wrestler? Are you a professional?" And they start talking and they put their hands up, and I'm like, they'll put their hand in my hand and they think I'm the coolest thing on earth. And it's so funny and adorable at the same time. But yeah, we were always trying to prepare our best. Is this the only answer? No, there's other things we'll continue to evaluate and look at, right? We're going to continue to evaluate different things we're currently looking into. We won't get into that right now, in addition to this opportunity. So with that being said, thank you for coming. I'll stay around with Matt to answer questions. I'm starting to ramble, so I apologize. But thank you guys for being here. So.
We're looking for 9 more individuals just like these two. So maybe a little bit more succinct than BK, but we love these guys. We work with them every day, and we appreciate the contributions they make to our school district. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, guys. I want to share a story about BK. The first time and the main reason why I'm very comfortable with the SRO and I'm begging and pushing for SROs at every school. The first time after one of these horrible incidents that we've all heard on the news. And by the way, one of those incidents touched my family closely in Nashville. I'm going to share two stories. One about BK and one about my niece that was in the school right next to the Covenant in Nashville and has been traumatized for a long time because of that. But BK, the first time I met you at Bridgepoint, you said I would throw myself in front of a bullet for a kid, and you got me at that. So thank you very much for that. And I believe that you can hire the right people for our district.
We trust them. Yes. Any other questions? Yes. Here.
Just to follow up on the audit, did Matt and BK participate in that? And then will they be allowed to participate in the closed session with the Board of Trustees about the layering?
So Matt and BK are both instrumental in our Safety and Security Committee for the school district, which is the initial interface with the audit group. And they have been with the board in closed session on a number of occasions to discuss security measures. So it's a symbiotic relationship. We couldn't do what we do without both of them. Yes.
This is another logistics question, but, and I don't think it's been asked, so forgive me if it has. Are there any talks in having another drug dog? Because won't that dog go with Travis County if we have our own? So will we have one at the high school? And then does the drug dog ever go to the junior highs? How does that
work? That's a good question. We were at one of the elementary schools last week, and we were discussing this possibility with the teachers, and they all wanted to know if every officer would come with his or her own dog. That we've not determined that yet. Dogs are actually very complicated and very expensive. Those of you who have pets know, but that's compounded when it's a law enforcement animal. So that's something that we'll have to discuss. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for this evening, Dr. Arnett and Jeremy, and to the trustees for pushing this forward and having this evening and the sense of urgency. So last Tuesday, it seemed like the board really wanted to have an SRO on each campus. But tonight it feels a little bit different. What would change that decision for you? Is it finance? Are there any other reasons to not have one on each campus right now?
Again, I don't want to speak for the board, so I'll let Mr. Havenstride respond.
Part of the reason we're non-committal about the scope or the scale of the commitment is because we haven't voted. And we had one board member who was not at the meeting. We will continue to discuss this. We will arrive at consensus and we will vote. I've been with the board. I don't know. I've just gotten out of the crystal ball business, and I don't try to predict what the board will do. But the board will make a decision that it believes is in the best interest of the kids and the teachers and the community. And it'll do it in public, and you guys will get the opportunity to listen to the deliberations.
I think we had a question right here.
So when you think about internal threats and external threats, and you think about the resource allocations that you guys are proposing for both, additional officers on campus as well as mental health, I assume that there's some studies and other things that you've done to determine, the impact of mental health resources versus applying additional officers to schools, and that is that an accurate statement? Because
I mean, we certainly have looked at both of those approaches and how they complement each other. And I think we have a better understanding now, especially after having studied this for the last several months, of where the needs might be in either of those two domains, how the two would interact with each other. And that understanding is greater and it's deeper now than it was a year ago at this time, certainly.
logistically, how does a resource officer coordinate with mental health professionals who maybe have confidentiality concerns? How does that work? Or have you guys thought through that? And I'm sure that's probably part of the policy decisions that you have to figure out, but if there are any cursory.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you're right. There are confidentiality constraints, especially in the mental health domain with counselors. But again, we've looked to those that we have connections with and best practices in other school districts. Round Rock ISD, which is certainly much larger than we are. Their police department, if I recall correctly, actually operates within the same department as all of their mental health supports. So they are seen as part of the same branch and they complement each other. They work in tandem with each other. We've seen examples of how that works, what it looks like, and that's what we're trying to learn from in terms of considering how we would implement it here. All right. Well, I think we'll end at that. And we so appreciate you being here tonight. This has been a really engaging dialogue and so much is going on this time of the school year. We know how busy your lives are, but the fact that you took time tonight to be with us and to be a part of this very important discussion, we are very grateful. You'll hear more about this at the board meeting next Tuesday night. And then, of course, it'll unfold over the next few weeks as we get to the end of the month of June. And by that point, you'll all be focused on summer vacations. But you'll see the news that the board has to share probably by the end of the month of June in terms of what we decide to go forward with. So thank you for being here tonight. We're very grateful. And this has been recorded. We did live stream it this evening. So if there's any part of this that you'd like to watch again at a later time, it'll be available on our website sometime in the very near future. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll hang around if you have any other questions, but otherwise have a good evening.